Good evening and welcome to Colorado Inside Out. I'm Patty Calhoun, the founder and editor of Westward, and today I'll be your guest host attempting to moderate this panel, which tonight includes David Kopel, Research Director for the Independence Institute and Adjunct Professor at the University of Denver Law School. Thank you. Eric Sonderman, political columnist for the Denver and Colorado Springs Gazettes and the Colorado Politics. Welcome. The very award-winning Marianne Goodland, Chief State House reporter for Colorado Politics, and civil rights attorney Tyrone Glover of Tyrone Glover Law. Welcome all. So we'll get right to it. The Colorado Blue Book has landed in mailboxes across the state with a thud. It has a hefty lineup of 11 measures for voters to consider come November. Everything from decriminalizing psychedelic mushrooms to subsidizing affordable housing. Which proposal is going to be the hot one, David?
Well, I think it depends on, whether you're more interested in mushrooms or booze. And, it divides our audience as well.
Split some of us at the table.
Right. You can put them in three large groups. You got one group that is tax cuts. So currently, if you're an elderly person who's lived in your home for over 10 years, you get a small break on property taxes with a homestead exemption. And that also applies to disabled service members. This would extend that to spouses of Gold Star families, like someone who lost a husband or wife in combat or in military activity. The Independence Institute, where I work, has a teeny tiny tax cut on the ballot to reduce the state income tax rate from 4.55 to 4.40%. We've got two tax increases. One is to pay for more food for everybody at school. We now have the school lunch program so that poor kids get a free meal at school. This would say everybody. Moms, you'll never have to make lunch again. That might help it pass, but I don't see why you should be raising taxes for families that can provide their own lunch or pay for it at school. And then a huge budget buster for so-called affordable housing, which would take away almost all of your tax refunds, and then in years when there aren't tax refunds, it would require cuts in other state government spending, and we know that always ends up as being cuts in the public school funding, and that affordable housing, as it's called, benefits a few lucky people but doesn't solve the problem of housing supply. And then on the key issues, you got one thing to legalize psychedelic mushrooms, which were legal in Colorado for most of our state's history, legalize possession but not sale, legalize use in medical settings, which has proven very effective in other countries for helping people deal with depression or anxiety, and various things to loosen up the rules on liquor stores being owned by large chains, and also some kind of change in the rules for delivery of alcohol, which I don't get because you can already call Drizzly and they'll bring you over a case of beer if you want, but apparently this thing's being pushed by Uber, so I don't know where to come down on Drizzly versus Uber.
Eric, you've got your choice. Psychedelics, liquor, taxes. What are you going to be following this year?
I think the ones I'm going to be following, I break them into a few categories, but their categories are somewhat different than David's. And your question was right. It is a hefty blue book, and we have 11 issues. Not all 11 of these issues are equal in my mind. I mean, a homestead exemption for Gold Star families, I mean, show me the 10 people out there who are going to vote against that particular one. I'm also struck a little bit, Patty, by what's not on this ballot. Even though it's a hefty lineup, it doesn't have some of the hot button issues that we're used to seeing in the state. There's no abortion issue on the ballot. There's no growth control, land use kind of issue on the ballot. There's no oil and gas issue. So some of those big money debates that we're used to in this state will be saved from this cycle. I think the ones that are going to get most of the attention are the affordable housing, quote unquote, ballot measure. I believe that is number 123 for voters. And then numbers 124 through 126, which is the three concerning liquor, ability of grocery stores to sell liquor, the delivery of liquor, et cetera, et cetera. And those will be well-funded campaigns, both for and I presume against as well. So I think if you're tuning into the airwaves and looking forward to political advertising, again, all 10 people for whom that describes, those are the ads that you're going to be seeing are going to be concentrated on those issues.
Award winner Marianne, you covered a lot of these initiatives on their way to the ballot. Which ones do you see catching fire?
I'm not sure that I see any of them catching fire. To Eric's point, the big issues that we normally see, and don't leave out, there was a ballot measure on education funding that polled really, really well, and they couldn't get enough signatures to get it onto the ballot. That and abortion tends to be really big drivers of turnout. So I'm not sure that any of these issues are the kinds of things that are going to get people all excited about heading to the ballot box. I think the interest is going to be more in the maybe the U.S. Senate race or those kinds of things rather than these ballot measures. And when you look at the amount of money that's being poured into these ballot measures, the psychedelic mushrooms and the liquor ones, it's very much going to be a one-sided advertising campaign.
And Tyrone, which ones are you following?
The big one for me is the affordable housing, just because I think it's a hefty spend, right? But I think it's a needed spend. There's going to be, I think, in this election, really a referendum on the criminalization of homelessness. Right, our jails and our courts have been clogged. There was a statistic that I read last month that I think a third of the cases in our municipal courts here in Denver are all related to folks being unhoused. The criminalization of this sort of thing has not worked, and so I think voters are going to be, ready, many of which, but also many of which are going to be divided on us really doubling down on homes as being the solution for our homelessness problem.
Well, you all have this blue book at home. Study it, because some of these are very complicated. But in the meantime, it looks like Governor Jared Polis has escaped an ethics violation with his Colorado cashback. But in the meantime, the state is collecting so much money that there may be another round of Tabor refunds in the spring. Eric, there's a lot of economic news coming out of the State House right now.
There's a lot of economic news. Yes, Governor Polis has apparently, it's not yet final, but dodged the ethics complaint filed by the chair of the Republican Party. It was probably always a political complaint, but it was a political move on the governor's part with the cash back and with the letter that he had accompanying it to all Colorado taxpayers, whatever. You sort of know in your heart of hearts that Jared Polis knows better, but he pushed the limit. It is no great surprise to me that the Democratic Secretary of State's office has absolved him of this when that same office is the one that has had 4.3, according to Axios' number, $4.3 million of taxpayer-funded advertising, conveniently right before the 2020 election and now right before the 2022 election. So clearly there's some campaigning going on here, maybe lower C campaigning, not capital C, on taxpayer dollars. In terms of the refund next year, there is so much up in the air, as The Economist, I think, indicated. Yes, they are anticipating continued good economic times and continued strong revenues to the state, which would dictate refunds again next year, but there's lots of uncertainty and lots of variables out there, from Europe to the Ukraine to inflation to the Fed continuing to raise interest rates, et cetera. Lastly, what is interesting is if there are refunds next year, no, we're not going to have the cash back. That was an election year tactic for 2022. Next year, any refunds would be processed in April with your tax return, either in terms of paying less taxes or a few weeks later getting an enhanced tax return.
Marianne, you're at the State House, so how's this money issue shaking out there?
The Tabor refunds that are going to be available next year are about $1 billion, so it's not a small amount of money. The Colorado cashback Tabor refund was about $2.7 billion, but there's still another $1 billion that will go out through the standard refund mechanisms. And what happens after that, maybe another year or two of strong Tabor refunds based on strong state revenues, and then after that it really drops off. But the thing that's making people on the Joint Budget Committee very nervous right now is not only that, but the impact of some of these ballot measures. And frankly, the affordable housing one is one that makes them very nervous, because that's a $300 million hit to the Tabor refund. And there's some concerns about how you keep that sustaining and keep that going should those Tabor refunds drop off. And they're expected to drop off in a big way in about 3 years.
Tyrone, you were talking about the affordable housing ballot measure. What's going to happen with these current economic climbs?
Well, I think we're sort of at a point of crossroads where we need to make a decision, right? have strong revenues, but we have inflation on the horizon. We have uncertain global and even national economic times. And we have an opportunity at this point to really put in place some mechanisms that target relief for not only lower income, but even middle income families here in Colorado. And at the end of the day, I agree, and there's probably some heartburn in the legislature about some of these decisions, but I think this gives us an opportunity during the good times to plan for the bad ones, and we'll see what Coloradans ultimately do.
And David, I know the Independence Institute has paid close attention to what Jared Polis is doing. You're even having a party in his name next week.
Yes, we are.
So how do you see all these economic issues working out?
Well, there's a difference between what is illegal, with criminal or other punishments, versus what is merely dishonest and sleazy. And Governor Polis's cashback letter was in the second category. Intentionally deceptive, but not illegal. If he had written that letter honestly, instead of saying, "I'm so pleased to be giving you this money," he would have said, "In the last election, I did everything I could so that you would never get another Taxpayers' Bill of Rights refund ever again. I've tried to eliminate them, but you voted against me, and so now, because of our Constitution, the state government has to give you this money back, but I'll take credit for it."
Okay, well, money, money, money. It's all about money right now, especially as the political ads are hitting the airwaves. And it looks like independent expenditure committees will be putting in huge amounts of money, with over $10 million coming in the first 2 weeks of September. Marianne, you've been writing about this. What do viewers need to know?
The interesting thing about this $10 million that came in the last a little over $10 million, is that half of it came in one contribution and for one independent expenditure committee, and that's Deep Colorado Wells, which is the IEC that is backing Heidi Ganahl, the Republican candidate for governor. Steve Wells, who is a rancher up in Weld County, is the one, and he has now put something like $11 million into Deep Colorado Wells. Now, I want to be clear, independent expenditure committees are barred by law from coordinating with campaigns. However, that said, the amount of money that Deep Colorado Wells has now putting into backing Ganahl is more than Jared Polis has taken out of his own personal bank account to pay for his campaigns, which he did to the tune of like $23 million back in 2018. The other big money that's coming in is coming in for state house and Senate candidates, Attorney General, Secretary of State, IECs. But this is just $10 million, frankly, if things happen the way they normally do in every election cycle, this is a drop in the bucket, and I expect the numbers will be probably somewhere in the $30 to $40 million range. So we have not seen anything yet.
Well, TV stations benefit from the expenditures, but do they help voters make any decisions, Tyrone?
I don't think so. And I remember I was in law school when the Citizens United decision was handed down by our Supreme Court. And there was a lot of critique, primarily from the left. I remember President Obama critiquing it and receiving boos during his State of the Union. But I think what we're seeing over a decade later is really the outgrowth of having all of this independent money, all of these super PACs, all of this corporate money flowing into politics. And it really, I think, convolutes and it makes it difficult for voters to assess their choices on the merits, because there's so much influence from money, frankly, where we don't really know where it's coming in to influence a candidate towards whatever their particular end is. And I understand that they cannot coordinate, but they can definitely align, and that's what I think we see with these independent expenditures and super PACs.
Well, David, we know it's a bunch of money bags over at the Independence Institute. How do you see the money affecting these campaigns?
Well, I think you got to take a step back before Citizens United and look at the root cause. As long as you have this enormous government we've got, spending over $50 billion a year, people are going to invest in politics so that they can get their share. Now, if we enforced our Colorado Constitution as it's written, which completely bans corporate welfare, we wouldn't have so many corporations putting money in so they can, put in $1 million into the campaign and walk away with many more millions from the taxpayers in one way or another. That's the root cause. I think there's a important difference in some of these expenditures, like the one Marianne was talking about, this rancher guy who's putting in money to defeat Polis. Everybody knows about it, and you can take that into account one way or the other. The bigger problem is these out-of-state money funnel organizations like the Arabella Group in Washington, D.C., which collects all this money from the very rich of the left and then founds these phony grassroots groups all over the country that you've never heard of to do nasty attack ads and things like that. So I would say if you're hearing an ad from some group you've never heard of that claims to represent Coloradans, more likely it represents the big money in Washington, D.C.
Well, we saw how much some of the big money didn't really impact the primary. Eric, where do you see this money influencing voters?
I mean, money has been proven over the years to influence voters. Ads work. That's why political consultants put them up there, and other expenditures as well. Kudos to Marianne for her reporting on this, and she is right that $10 million is only an opening bid. The numbers are going to get much bigger. I agree with Tyrone, but I also agree with David. I think there are multiple causes of this. One is it's an outgrowth of Citizens United. One, as David mentioned, is as long as government is sort of omnipresent in our lives, there's going to be major money spent to influence what government does. And a third that has not been touched is all of the ballot measures that Coloradans and in other states as well have passed over the years in the name of campaign finance reform that have tried to take money to lower contribution limits, to do everything possible to make it more difficult for candidates themselves and their own campaigns to raise money. So instead it goes around through these side doors and back doors and quote unquote independent expenditure groups. The real harm is the campaigns themselves. I mean, let's go with Heidi Ganahl and let's go with the rancher Steve Wells. Heidi Ganahl, no matter how inept a campaign I think she is waging, is not going to be in charge of her own campaign message. Steve Wells will have much more advertising on the air through his independent expenditure group than Heidi Ganahl will this fall. He will determine what her message is instead of her and her core advisors being able to determine what the message is. I love the names of some of these groups. I mean, you know, it's just like a word salad. All Together Colorado, Coloradans Creating Opportunity, Strong Colorado for All, Restore the Rockies. It's all mom and apple pie word salad for these big money organizations.
Well, and sadly, we'll see a lot more of these ads, and if we have time at the end, we'll talk about some of the worst ones that are already out there. But before that, let's talk about local police departments. Aurora has 2 police chief finalists after a third withdrew. We also have the Elijah McClain autopsy report being released right as we are filming this. And meanwhile, Denver lost its appeal of a $14 million judgment for police actions during the George Floyd protests 2 years ago. Tyrone, which would you like to pick up on there?
I'd like to talk about this $14 million judgment that came back. And hopefully this is at least the beginning or sends a message to the city of Denver to change course on this sort of tactic of fighting these cases at all costs and appealing them and not coming and trying to actually make these victims whole or deliver justice. At the end of the day, people want to see accountability, they want to see responsibility, and the people spoke, and they spoke with that verdict, and still they appealed it up, and the higher court sent it right back. So, other than them fighting over some attorney fees at this point, that verdict is going to stand, and hopefully a large enough verdict, we hope, like this, will, sort of urge and move the city to start doing the right thing in these types of cases.
David, this was the first big federal case coming out of the protests. Yeah. Where do you see the next ones coming from?
Well, I'd say this one, let's focus on the stage that we're at. There was a trial, a jury verdict, and then if you lose the jury trial, you can argue to the judge, no reasonable jury could have done this. And so the judge should overturn the jury verdict. That happens sometimes, but not often. I think the judge was right to, regardless of what the judge might have done if he were on the jury, that he said, no, the jurors had plenty of evidence to come to the conclusions that they did. The only thing he changed was there was one plaintiff, Elizabeth Epps, who had been hit by multiple pepper balls, and she was a peaceful protester. And then one officer who fired just one round of pepper ball at her got a $250,000 in punitive damages against him, and the judge says that's excessive in light of the whole situation, so he reduced that to $50,000. Denver will likely appeal this to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, but given that I think that the trial was conducted pretty carefully by the judge, I think it's unlikely the Court of Appeals will find something so unreasonable at trial that they have to reverse it.
Eric, we can stay in Denver or go to Aurora.
I think I'm mainly going to go to Aurora because I'm following two esteemed attorneys, as we like to say around this panel, and I'm not sure I have a whole lot to add to their analysis of Denver, other than in the mention of Elizabeth Epps. Not only is she a plaintiff in this case, but she is about to be a state representative, and a state representative who's going to attract some attention just given her profile and her pretty hard left ideology. She's going to be a lightning rod in the state legislature. In terms of Aurora, I don't know either of the gentlemen who are now the finalists. As you indicated, Patty, the third finalist, withdrew. Whoever gets this job has a heavy lift, a big lift ahead of them. Aurora is a growing city. You've talked, Patty, so many times about how Aurora is in some ways the most interesting place in Colorado right now. It's the epicenter of so much. I think Vanessa Wilson, the former police chief, had one strong platform, and she was there as a reformer. And I think what she indicated is that any successful police chief has to be able to satisfy multiple constituencies. And yes, they have to be a reformer, and they have to enforce standards, and sometimes they have to slap officers on the hand or worse in terms of discipline, but they also have to have the support and even the affection of those officers and a feeling from those officers that the chief has their back, and Wilson did not have that. And we'll see who emerges from these two and whether they have what it takes.
Marianne, Aurora, Denver, police issues in both cities.
I'm going to go with the Aurora Police Chief issue as well. What Vanessa Wilson didn't have, in addition to the support from her officers, despite the support from the community that she had, was the backing of the conservative majority on Aurora City Council. And I think that that's going to be a real interesting thing to watch as they go through the public comment period on this, which starts on Monday, just to see who is able to satisfy both sides of City Council, whether it's the liberal side or the conservative side. Is there a candidate in this group of two, and they said they're going to go back and maybe pull some other semifinalists, is there a candidate that's going to be able to satisfy all of those masters? I wish them luck.
Don't we all? But in the meantime, it is time for our favorite part, Disgrace of the Week. David?
Well, the Independence Institute this week before this released a report on Governor Polis's promised to cut tax expenditures, special interest tax breaks, and then give the money to the people. What we reported was he did cut some special interest tax breaks by a certain amount, but then he increased other special interest tax breaks by way more. So over 10 years under Polis, we'll have $600 million more in special interest giveaways through the tax code. We do the report. The governor's office can't dispute any of our facts because they're all from Colorado state government documents. So they say, oh, the Independence Institute is a wildly partisan group. You know, I wish whoever that spokesperson is could have been around in 2005 when we were at an Independence Institute in an all-out war with the governor, Republican Governor Owens, when we were fighting his plans for a big tax and borrowing increase.
Eric, your disgrace.
Denver Public Schools, which seems to get the award or the recognition more weeks than not these days. So many of the messes that they're involved in right now are of their own making. And this week, the situation with the young women and the principal from Martin Luther King Jr. Early College, where they have filed a trademark violation on them for a campaign they started of no justice, no peace. Whatever you make of the merits, I'm not even going to go into the merits. This shows everything you want about initiative of young people, education of young people taking the ball. And DPS is now claiming that they own the trademark to that phrase and is effectively suing these young individuals.
A true outrage. That's a good one. Marianne.
I want to address something that is part of the recently concluded trial of Michael Close, who murdered Isabella Fallis in the Ballpark neighborhood in the attempted murder of her boyfriend, Darian Simon. What was interesting to me was the fact that there is one aspect of this case that has not yet, and it doesn't look like it's ever going to come to fruition, and that is, and I'm sorry, Dave, this is going to light you up, but I'm going to do it anyway. The gun that was used, an AK-47, which is banned in the city of Denver, no charges against the owner, a former police officer, and it had an ammunition magazine that allowed the shooter to fire 24 rounds. 15 rounds is the limit by state law in 2013. Where's the charges related to this? If you're going to pass state laws, it would be a nice thing if you actually enforced them.
Tyrone.
And I would just briefly add to that one, the officer involved received no sanction and is now working in Colorado Springs. So much for accountability there. But your last question was on DPD. That's still on my mind. So my disgrace of the week is a new lawsuit filed now on behalf of a high-ranking sergeant at DPD alleging sexism and racism. They're just continue to be rife with issues and problems.
Truly an outrage. All right, very quickly, say something nice.
That woman over there, Marian Goodland, won 3 individual press awards for her journalism from the Colorado Press Association.
So true. Aaron.
Thank you.
It's Rosh Hashanah starting Sunday night into Monday. Happy New Year, Lashana Tova to our Jewish viewers and friends.
Thanks. Marianne.
Denverite's Kyle Harris had a great story Friday morning about a guy who goes up and down bike trails pulling goat heads, which is the bane of every cyclist in the metro area. So a salute to Goathead Greg, a.k.a. Greg Scomp, who has saved more cyclist tires and money than he can ever possibly imagine.
And Tyrone.
Fall. It actually feels like fall finally. I'm a California transplant, so I came here, wasn't used to any seasons, and so I always get really excited when the seasons change, and going from summer to fall is one of those. And it's great to see everyone come around all the great harvests and autumn festivals.
That is so true, and that is definitely all the time we have for tonight's episode of A Colorado Inside Out. For more great programming, please visit pbs12.org, and you can also share your thoughts with us at CIO@pbs.org. I'm Patty Calhoun, and thanks for watching. Good night.